invite Dr. Doyin Salami, the co-chair and resident commissioner of Fiscal Policy Roundtable, to make a presentation on fiscal governance and taxation in Nigeria. Dr. Salami, please.
What are the issues in terms of fiscal governance and what do we need to do in order to remedy them? And I think it's pretty clear that when we talk about fiscal governance, it's really, as I've put up on the slides that you can see, it's about rules, regulations, and procedures that influence how budgetary policy is planned, approved, implemented, monitored, and evaluated. Now, in a sense, this happens here anyway. After all, we do budgets every year at federal and at state levels. And so there is some governance in place. But it might be interesting just to get a quick sense, okay, what underlies all of these fiscal governance things? And in my view, there are about 4 or 5 things. The first for me is data. What numbers do we have that guide our budgetary and fiscal arrangements and procedures? What rules do we have that guide us? Are we necessarily always short-term? Beyond that, what level of independence do the components of our fiscal arrangements have? And then, of course, the budgetary procedures that we deploy, how robust are they? What issues? But before we start talking about this, I think this for me is one of the most important reasons why fiscal governance is important. As you can see there, the debate about whether Nigeria's indebtedness is sustainable or not, I think is clearly addressed here. The light green colors refer to debt to GDP. The dark green colors refer to debt service to revenue. And we're already at positions where our debt service to revenues have become, in my view, unsustainable. Yes, they've gone down. They had gone down between 2016 and 2017, but we are still far above 40%. That said, the challenges around our debt service capacity are underpinned by 2 things, in my view. Rising expenditure in the face of falling revenues. And when you look, Nigeria's revenue yield currently is about 7%. Now, there is no way that that does much. When you look at other countries, and I simply chose a selection, the African average on the revenue side is, as that shows, almost 22.5%, whereas Nigeria is almost 7.5%. So you can imagine a situation where it's not now about an economy, it's about the capacity to and the efficiency of raising resources that the public sector can deploy. If, and I re-emphasize, if we met the African average, what that immediately does is that we're doing 1/3 of what everybody else does, so you pretty much triple your revenue basis. And that, for me, is a key reason why these issues are very important. As I said, spending is rising. Our strategy currently is spend our way out of a recession. Problem is, the revenue side hasn't heard that that is our strategy. That said, governance, in my view, is not about spending and revenues only, spending towards purpose. And for me, what all of this shows is the quality of life argument. Human development diminishing, per capita income diminishing. So any which way, the point is that our fiscal arrangements need to be looked at if they are going to take care of the people that they're supposed to. So, having said that, what are the key issues that our fiscal governance arrangements need to deal with? In my view, one of the key challenges is not that we don't have these things set up, or statistics, implementation, fiscal rules. We have them. But to what extent is our fidelity to some of these things? Because when you look, for me, it's an important question that to what extent is our fidelity? The Fiscal Responsibility Act is very clear about quite a number of things, but to what extent do we observe them? Beyond that, I think Nigeria urgently must get back to a meaningful budget cycle. Currently, 2019 ahead, we're coming to the end of October, and it's pretty clear that pretty much what we did last year is what we will do again this year. And by that, I mean the budget will probably not get to the National Assembly until at the earliest, sometime much later in November. And by the time it's deliberated upon and with an election ahead, we probably will just about be lucky to get a budget before the constitutional requirements for its passage elapses. How do we plan? How do we propose to get an economy going in the absence of an established, reliable budget cycle? Responsibility and accountability is also very, very important. In my view, yes, government is large, but whilst at the federal level, I don't know how many of you have been reading the auditor's report, the Auditor General's report over the last couple of days or thereabout, over the last week. At the federal level, yes. By the way, the one published now is for 2016. Now, imagine, at the state level, it's just nowhere to be found. Believe me, we've gone after state auditors general trying to get copies of their certified audits of their state spending and revenues, and we just can't. So when you don't have that kind of efficient, timely resort to accountability, then in my view, we actually create more challenges than we find. A very big issue that I think our fiscal governance arrangements needs to determine is what's the philosophy of fiscal policy. Because whether we like it or not, yes, we speak about the need for growth in the economy, but does the underlying philosophy of fiscal policy, does it speak to the same thing? Does it speak to efficiency in the use of resources? Don't forget, there are 800 governments or governing units in Nigeria, 774 local governments, 36 states, 1 FCT, 1 federal government. Even if we can hold the federal accountable belatedly, to what extent can we hold anyone else accountable? To what extent do we understand some of the philosophies that guide many of these federating units? In my view, therefore, where we are at, we have reached simply because oil has been the key driver of our fiscal arrangements. Doesn't matter whether it's revenue, whether it's spending therefrom. And so, what do we need to do? In my book, it's got to be about fiscal governance that grows the economy and in consequence grows both the revenue and the expenditure sides. Let me re-emphasize that. Fiscal governance philosophy must be such that it grows the economy first and foremost, and grows the economy in an inclusive manner. Secondly, we then speak to effective and efficient collection of mobilization of resources and use of those resources. And therefore very clear in my mind that, yes, the structure of incentives has to be looked at to ensure that it actually does stimulate the economy. And we need to understand that revenues must be available to spend. But how do you determine what is the level of mobilization that you need? And this is where, for some of us, it's a bit frustrating. And let me put, there are two ways to do this. The first is simply to say, look, we are 7%, everybody, the average is 22. If we get from 7 to 22, there's a significant improvement in our resource base. So that's one way. Essentially, from a revenue perspective, get more revenue, then we worry about how you spend it. But in my view, the more important thing about fiscal governance should have to be, what are the objectives that we set for poverty reduction, for example? What is the relationship between government spending and poverty reduction? And given the Fiscal Responsibility Act's requirement of a cap on the deficit, then you can figure out how much revenues that you need in order to achieve those goals around the improvement of the quality of life. In my view, when the question is asked, where do we need to go? That is where we need to go. A clear definition of what the goals are to be, a clear articulation of what the relationships are, and therefore a clear a basis for determining just how much resources you need to mobilize. And let me perhaps conclude on this note by saying that where we are at, domestic resource mobilization, you cannot avoid it. It's the only basis that is sustainable. However, the government also needs to be clear about what it is that it is spending money on that can be ceded, allowed to the private sector. Because that then speaks to a more judicious and effective use of the resources that are available. We've got a chicken and egg situation. Which comes first? Should we raise revenues as a prelude to spending? Or how do you, as research has found for Nigeria, low tax morale, low trust in government, how do you rebuild the governance between the government and the people, which speaks to the government collecting taxes, but the people feeling that they have the benefit of good services? In my view, Nigeria must move away from where we have been for far too long. And where have we been? We've been in that situation where there's a covenant between the government and the people. We, the people, will not pay taxes, and in return, we will not ask what oil money is spent on. As it is, the government is now asking us to pay taxes, but remains unwilling to answer this supplementary question, what is its spending doing for the people? So for me, the challenge is clearly defined. They are not insurmountable, but they do require a very determined approach that deals and understands some of these issues. Thank you very much.